I was dating this guy. His name was Michael. Michael and I were introduced through friends and started dating almost immediately. We were head over heels for each other. Michael was very driven. He was working at Dell. He was going back to school working on one degree. And after finishing that degree, the plan was for us to head off to Houston, and he was going to go to law school. Everyone around us knew that that's where we were headed. Michael and I were headed into the happily ever after. Settle down, have kids, everything. Everything I'd ever dreamed of. My life was exactly where I thought it should be, where I wanted it to be. It was headed in exactly the direction I planned. I had a couple friends at the time also that I want to tell you about. One was Chris. Chris I had only known for about 3-4 months. But I'll tell you this about Chris. Chris was one of those people that when he walked into a room, everyone noticed. Everyone saw him because he lit the place up. He was one of those people, and I don't know if you guys know anyone like this, that will make a complete fool of himself in order to get a laugh out of you. That was Chris. Always a joy, always sunshine, great guy. The other person that I want to tell you about was my friend David. David and I had been friends for years. There was something that David and I understood about each other. I'll tell you this, David was not like everyone else. He didn't follow the main line. He didn't follow what everyone thought you should do. David wasn't the guy who graduated from high school and ran off to college and got the big degree and hung it, on the wall in the corner office. That wasn't David at all. David had to do things his own way. And I think that's why David and I were such good friends, because I was the same way. I had to find my own way of doing things. And David was someone who celebrated those successes with me. I was able to confide in him. He was a loyal friend. He was one of those people who never turned his back on you. I remember when I got promoted at work, David said that there was nobody in the world who deserved it more than I did. David kind of started to figure things out for himself. And I walked into Michael's house one night after work, and David was standing there holding up this piece of paper. And as I got closer to him, I realized that it was his diploma, that he had gone back to school and hadn't told any of us. And I did what all girls do when we're excited. I screamed, I jumped up and down, and I threw my arms around him. And David said, I knew that everyone would be happy for me, but I knew that you would be the most excited. And that's kind of how we worked. We were a good team and we were good friends. On April 12th, 2006, I had an opportunity to go hang out with a friend of mine that I hadn't seen in months. So she and I decided to head out, and because I was going to be out, Michael decided that he was going to get together with David and Chris, and he was going to go have a guys' night out. They went out to a couple bars, stopped off a couple different places, and along the way they met up with another friend of theirs, Scott. Scott became intoxicated, and he went ahead and left the bar. Upon realizing this, Michael got David and Chris in the car, and he decided to go ahead and take them home also. Michael was driving. Scott was a few miles up the road when he lost control of his vehicle. He was exiting the highway, lost control. Scott's car flipped. He was ejected through the front windshield and landed with his body on the highway. There was a semi-truck driver named Mario who actually saw this. A few other vehicles saw what was going on. Everyone stopped. Mario pulled his semi over to the side of the road, and everyone got out of the car and ran to Scott in order to save his life, in order to pull him out of the highway. But just as they got to him, they actually had to jump back out of the way as Michael came up over the hill, ran over Scott, drugged Scott's body for 40 feet, We don't know if Scott was dead or alive when he was hit. Drug him for 40 feet, and when Scott was released from the car, Michael lost control of his vehicle and ran it under the semi that had stopped. Chris was decapitated. David's neck was broken. And Michael lay in the driver's seat, partially scalped. I had actually was headed back home at that point. And as we're driving, we see all of the lights and the emergency vehicles and everything that's going on. And we follow traffic off to the side. My friend was driving. We follow the traffic off onto the median. And as I look over, I see these feet hanging out from under this white sheet. And seeing clearly that somebody had lost their life there, I turned my head quickly and I said, "Dear God, please be with their friends and their family." Knowing that Michael would be home at any time, I went ahead, went home, went upstairs, and went to bed. At 6:33 in the morning, I awoke to banging on the door, and I could hear police. "Nobody's in trouble, but we need everyone up." So I ran downstairs, and I remember as I saw them, I said, "What's wrong? Somebody tell me what's wrong." And they said, "Nobody's in trouble, but we need everyone up." So I turned and I ran back upstairs to Danny's room, who was Michael's roommate, and I threw open the door and I screamed at Danny, "Danny, get up. They're not going to tell me what's wrong until you get out of bed." And Danny got up and we went back downstairs. And again, I'm saying, "What's wrong? Tell me what's wrong." And that's when I noticed with the police officers was this gentleman. He was in a red shirt and it said chaplain. And so he asked me to sit down, and I did. And he said, "Michael's been in an accident." And I said, "Is he okay?" And he said, "He's in ICU. But there were 2 other people with him." And I said, "Who was with him?" And he said, "Chris Kaiser and David Beck are dead." My entire life changed in that split second. Everything about me changed in that second. I lost Michael that night too. Not physically. He survived. He, after a couple weeks in the hospital, was able to come home. Nursed him back to health, but he was never the same. He was overcome with guilt, anger, fear of prosecution. He wouldn't eat, wouldn't sleep. I'd wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning and he'd still be on the computer trying to find a way to sleep. I don't know, I guess because I was trying to search my feelings and trying to mourn the loss of my friends, and at the same time he was trying to figure out all of these emotions that he had. Before you knew it, we were just on 2 different pages. We were fighting constantly. Neither one of us could really understand where the other one was coming from, and we broke up. The last time I saw Michael was at his trial, as he was convicted of 2 counts of intoxicated manslaughter and sent to prison. This is particularly hard for me today. Just this last weekend, I spent the weekend with David's family. David's parents threw my fiance and I an amazing wedding shower. It was beautiful. But what I really felt the entire time was that I was spent an entire weekend without David. Someone who should have been there. Someone who won't be at my wedding. I want to tell you guys that about a year before this wreck, I had my own DUI. Anytime I would think about it, anytime I would talk about it, I would say, I thought I was okay. I really thought I was. The person who got in the car with me thought I was okay to drive us. Imagine my surprise when at Michael's trial, I found out that his blood alcohol level was only a 0.01 higher than mine had been. Right now, you guys are me. You're someone who had a couple drinks, thought they were okay, got behind the wheel, and found out they weren't okay when the lights came on behind them. But if you try one more time, even one more time, you could be Michael. Someone who thought he was okay and got behind the wheel and found out he wasn't okay when 3 of his friends were dead. We talked about choice. I want to tell you some of the choices I've made. I made a choice. I made a decision the day that I was arrested. I remember the first thing I did when I got out of jail is I went home and I called my mom and I said, Mama, I promise you this is not what I'll be remembered for. I made another decision the morning after David and Chris were killed. I promised myself that as soon as I was ready, as soon as I was emotionally ready to do so, that I was going to tell their story. Made yet another decision just this past year. I left a company that I had been with for 12 years because they served alcohol. And I joined another company. Thing is, guys, your decisions, your choices from this point forward are not going to be the same as mine. There are a million different circumstances that brought us together in this room tonight. You're not going to make the same choices I did. You're not going to be faced with the same exact decisions that I had to make. But the thing is you have to make a choice today. And whether you realize it or not, you're going to make the choice before you even get out of this building. You have to decide what you are going to do with this second chance. Who you're going to be from this point forward. I know you guys don't want to be in this room. It's hard for me to be here telling this story. I know you don't want to be here. I thank God that you are. Because like Steve said, it could have been so much worse. And I want to show you, this was your alternative. This is where my friends lived the very last second of their lives. This is what I drove past and saw. This is the exact picture that was up during closing arguments at Michael's trial. The people that are affected, hundreds, thousands, just in this one instance alone. 12 jurors who never asked to be a part of any of this had to listen to this story, had to look at this. I'm just asking that you think about this when you make your decision today. Think about how it could have been. And think about how lucky you are to have a chance to make a different decision from this point forward. Thank you.